Captain David Johnson stretched his tired legs as he walked through the busy airport terminal. After 20 years of flying commercial jets, he could navigate any airport with his eyes closed. Today was different, though. Instead of being in the cockpit, he was just another passenger heading to his next assignment in Miami. David had been flying for Skyline Airlines for 2 decades. He started as a young co-pilot fresh out of flight school, and now he was one of their most experienced captains. His colleagues respected him. His safety record was spotless, and he had trained dozens of new pilots over the years. But right now, none of that mattered. He was just tired and looking forward to settling into his first-class seat for the 3-hour flight ahead. The airport was packed with travelers. Families dragged oversized suitcases while business people talked loudly into their phones. David made his way to Gate 15, where Flight 832 to Miami was already boarding. He pulled out his boarding pass and checked it one more time. Seat 2A, first class. The company always booked their off-duty pilots in first class when they were traveling for work assignments. David was dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt. He had packed his uniform in his carry-on bag since he wouldn't need it until tomorrow morning. After spending the day doing yard work at home, he had barely had time to shower and change before rushing to catch this evening flight. He looked like any other passenger heading out on a business trip. The boarding announcement crackled over the interphone. We are now boarding first class and our premium members on Flight 832 to Miami. David joined the short line at the gate, pulling out his phone to text his wife that he was about to board. When his turn came, he handed his boarding pass to the lead flight attendant. Her name tag read Patricia, and she looked to be in her 40s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Patricia took his boarding pass and scanned it with the handheld device. The machine beeped, confirming his seat assignment. But instead of smiling and welcoming him aboard like she had done with the previous passengers, Patricia frowned. She looked at David, then at the boarding pass, then back at David again. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a tone that was noticeably different from how she had spoken to others. "I think there might be some mistake with your seat assignment." David was confused. "I'm sorry, what kind of mistake? This boarding pass shows first class, but..." Patricia paused, looking David up and down. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" Other passengers in line behind David started to shift impatiently. He could feel their eyes on him as the conversation continued. "Yes, this is definitely my ticket," David replied calmly. "Is there a problem with the scanner?" Patricia's colleague, a younger flight attendant named Kevin, stepped over to see what was happening. "Everything okay here, Patricia? This passenger has a first-class boarding pass, but I'm not sure it's legitimate," Patricia said, speaking about David as if he wasn't standing right there. David felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He had experienced situations like this before, though never quite so publicly. "The boarding pass is legitimate. I work for Skyline Airlines and I'm traveling on company business." "You work for the airline?" Patricia asked skeptically.
In what capacity?
"I'm a captain," David said, reaching for his wallet. "I can show you my employee ID if that would help." Patricia and Kevin exchanged glances. Kevin whispered something in Patricia's ear and she shook her head slightly. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside while we sort this out," Patricia announced loudly enough for other passengers to hear. "There seems to be some confusion about your seating assignment." The businessman behind David in line sighed audibly and checked his expensive watch. "Is there a problem here?" he asked impatiently. "Just a small mix-up," Patricia replied sweetly to the businessman. "We'll have this sorted out in just a moment." Her tone when speaking to the white passenger was completely different from how she had been addressing David. David remained calm but firm. "There's no mix-up. This is my assigned seat, and I'd like to board the plane now." He pulled out his employee ID card and held it up for Patricia to see. The card clearly showed his photo, his name, and his title as captain with Skyline Airlines. Patricia barely glanced at it. "Sir, these IDs can be easily faked," she said dismissively. "I'm going to need additional verification before I can allow you into first class." The line behind David was growing longer, and more passengers were starting to take notice of the commotion. Some pulled out their phones, though David couldn't tell if they were just checking messages or recording the interaction. "What kind of additional verification?" David asked. He had never been asked for additional verification before, not in 20 years of flying with the company. "We'll need to contact the gate agent to confirm your identity and your ticket," Patricia replied. "Kevin, can you call down to the gate desk?" David's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his voice steady. I've been flying with this airline for 20 years. I've never had my identity questioned like this before. Well, we have procedures we need to follow, Patricia said curtly, for the safety and security of all our passengers. A middle-aged woman in the line spoke up. Excuse me, but this gentleman has shown you his boarding pass and his employee ID. What more do you need? Patricia turned to address the woman with a forced smile. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but we have security protocols that we must follow. This is for everyone's safety. The woman frowned but didn't say anything else. David noticed that she and a few other passengers were now clearly paying attention to what was happening. Look, David said, trying a different approach. Why don't I just call Captain Rodriguez, the pilot flying this route today? I'm sure he can verify who I am. The flight crew is busy with pre-flight preparations, Patricia replied quickly. They can't be disturbed right now. Kevin returned from making the call to the gate desk. He whispered something to Patricia and her expression hardened. Sir, I'm going to need you to step completely out of the boarding line, Patricia announced loudly. We're going to have to resolve this situation before you can board the aircraft. The passengers behind David began murmuring among themselves. Some looked annoyed at the delay, while others seemed uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. David felt his patience wearing thin, but he knew that getting angry would only make things worse. This is ridiculous, he said quietly. I'm a captain with this airline. I've probably flown this exact route hundreds of times. If that's true, then this verification process shouldn't be a problem for you, Patricia replied with a fake smile. David realized that this situation was escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding. He pulled out his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts. It was time to make a call that would change everything. David looked at his phone screen, considering who to call. He could contact his supervisor, but it was already past business hours. His finger hovered over Captain Lisa Chen's number. Lisa was the chief pilot for the region, and one of his closest friends in the company. But before he could make the call, Patricia's voice cut through his thoughts. Sir, I'm going to need you to put that phone away, Patricia said sharply. Making phone calls during the boarding process is not allowed. I'm not on the plane yet, David replied calmly. I'm still in the terminal, and I have every right to make a phone call. Patricia's face reddened slightly. She clearly wasn't used to passengers questioning her authority. Well, if you're going to be difficult about this, then maybe first class isn't the right place for you anyway. The comment hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. Several passengers who had been pretending not to listen now turned to stare openly. David felt the familiar sting of discrimination, but he had learned over the years how to handle these situations without losing his temper. What exactly do you mean by that? David asked, his voice still controlled but with a slight edge. I mean that first class is for passengers who can follow simple instructions and cooperate with airline staff, Patricia replied loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear her. Kevin, the younger flight attendant, looked uncomfortable with how the situation was developing. Patricia, maybe we should just— No, Kevin, she cut him off. This passenger is being uncooperative and potentially disruptive. We have policies about this kind of behavior. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Uncooperative? Disruptive? All I did was show you my valid boarding pass and employee ID. By now, the boarding process had completely stopped. Passengers were looking back and forth between David and Patricia like they were watching a tennis match. Some seemed annoyed at the delay, while others appeared genuinely concerned about what they were witnessing. A tall man in a business suit who had been waiting in line behind David spoke up. Excuse me, but I saw this gentleman show you his airline ID. Why are we still discussing this? Patricia turned to the businessman with a completely different demeanor. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but we have security procedures that we must follow. Sometimes passengers try to use fake credentials to upgrade themselves illegally, but his ID looked legitimate to me, the businessman insisted. These things can be very convincing forgeries, Patricia replied. We're trained to spot these kinds of attempts. David felt his phone vibrate in his hand. He glanced down and saw a text message from his wife asking if his flight was delayed. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, being treated like a criminal by his own airline, while his wife was worried about a simple flight delay. He discreetly opened his phone's camera app and started recording. He had learned from other people's experiences that having video evidence was crucial in situations like this. I'm going to record this conversation, David announced clearly. I believe I'm being discriminated against, and I want to document what's happening." Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. "Recording airline personnel without permission is against federal regulations," she declared loudly. "Actually, that's not true," said a young woman who appeared to be in her 20s. She had been listening to the entire exchange while waiting to board. Passengers are allowed to record interactions with airline staff in public areas of the terminal. "I'm a law student, and we covered this in my civil rights class." Patricia shot the law student a withering look but didn't respond directly to her comment. Meanwhile, Kevin had quietly stepped away and was speaking into his radio. David could only catch fragments of what he was saying. "Situation at the gate, needs supervisor. Passenger refusing to comply." "Refusing to comply with what?" David called out to Kevin. "What exactly am I refusing to comply with?" "I've shown you my ticket, my ID, and I've been nothing but polite this entire time." Kevin looked embarrassed but continued his radio conversation. David noticed that several passengers were now taking out their own phones. The law student was openly recording the interaction, and David could see at least 3 other people with their phones pointed in his direction. Patricia seemed to realize that the situation was getting out of control, but instead of de-escalating, she doubled down on her position. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the waiting passengers, "we apologize for the delay, but we have a passenger who is refusing to follow security procedures and is becoming increasingly agitated." "That's not true," called out the middle-aged woman who had spoken up earlier. "This man has been completely calm and reasonable. You're the one who's being difficult." Several other passengers murmured in agreement. David was surprised to see how many people were clearly on his side. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to board the aircraft now," Patricia said to the woman. "This situation doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us when we see someone being treated unfairly," the woman replied firmly. She didn't move from her spot in line. The gate area was now buzzing with conversation as more passengers became aware of what was happening. David could hear fragments of discussions around him. "Did you see how she talked to him differently than everyone else? He showed her his airline ID. What more does she want? This is exactly the kind of thing you see on the news. Should we be recording this?" Patricia was clearly frustrated that she was losing control of the situation. She grabbed her radio and spoke into it urgently. "I need the gate agent down here immediately. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." David continued recording, making sure to capture not just Patricia's behavior, but also the reactions of the other passengers. He knew that this kind of documentation could be crucial if he needed to file a formal complaint. "Sir, I'm going to give you one last chance to cooperate," Patricia announced. "Either you stop recording and follow our verification procedures, or we're going to have to take further action." "What kind of further action?" David asked. Before Patricia could answer, a uniformed gate agent appeared at the boarding door. She was an older woman with gray hair and a stern expression. Patricia immediately rushed over to her and began speaking in hushed, urgent tones. David couldn't hear exactly what she was saying, but he could see her gesturing in his direction repeatedly. The gate agent nodded several times as Patricia spoke, then walked over to where David was standing. "Sir, I understand there's some confusion about your seating assignment," the gate agent said in a professional but cold tone. "There's no confusion on my part," David replied. "I have a valid first-class ticket and proper airline identification. I'm a captain with this airline and I'm traveling on company business." The gate agent looked at his boarding pass and ID card, but her expression remained skeptical. "These documents appear to be in order, but we've had some issues recently with sophisticated forgeries. I'm going to need to verify your employment with the airline directly." "How long will that take?" David asked. "It could be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour," the gate agent replied. "The verification department closes at 6 p.m. David looked at his watch. It was already 5:45 p.m. He realized that this delay tactic could result in him missing his flight entirely. "This is unacceptable," he said, his frustration finally starting to show. "I've never been treated like this by my own airline. Sir, if you continue to raise your voice and cause a disturbance, we're going to have to call airport security," the gate agent warned. The threat hung in the air as David realized just how serious the situation had become. Around him, passengers continued to watch and record, and he knew that whatever happened next would determine not just whether he made his flight, but whether justice would be served. David looked around at the crowd of passengers who had now formed a semicircle around the unfolding drama. Some were recording with their phones, others were whispering to each other, and a few were checking their watches with obvious concern about the delay. The gate agent stood with her arms crossed, waiting for his response to her ultimatum about calling security. "Before you make that call," David said calmly, "I'd like to make one phone call of my own. I think it will clear up this entire situation very quickly." The gate agent hesitated. "Sir, as I explained, phone calls during boarding are—" "I'm not boarding yet, am I?" David interrupted, his patience finally wearing thin. "You won't let me board. So technically, I'm still a passenger in the terminal with the right to make a phone call." Patricia, who had been standing behind the gate agent, stepped forward again. "We don't have time for phone calls. Either you cooperate with our security procedures or we're moving forward with having you removed from the gate area." "Removed for what?" asked the businessman who had been defending David earlier. "This is getting ridiculous. The man has shown you proper identification." "Sir, please board the aircraft," the gate agent told the businessman. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does concern me," the businessman replied firmly. "I fly with this airline twice a week for business, and I've never seen anything like this. If this is how you treat your own employees, I'm seriously reconsidering my loyalty to Skyline Airlines." David noticed several other passengers nodding in agreement. The law student who had spoken up earlier was still recording everything on her phone. "You know what?" David announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to make that phone call right now." He scrolled through his contacts and found the number he was looking for. Captain Lisa Chen, chief pilot for the Eastern region. As the phone rang, David put it on speaker so everyone could hear. Patricia looked annoyed but didn't try to stop him. "David!" Lisa's voice came through clearly. "What's going on?" "I thought you were flying to Miami tonight." "I'm trying to, Lisa, but I'm having a problem at the gate. I'm being prevented from boarding my flight because the crew doesn't believe I'm actually a pilot with the airline." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "What do you mean they don't believe you're a pilot? You've been with the company for 20 years. I've shown them my employee ID and my boarding pass, but they're claiming my credentials might be fake. They want to do a verification process that could take up to an hour." Lisa's voice took on a sharp edge. "Put whoever's in charge on the phone now." The gate agent looked uncomfortable but reached for the phone. "This is Rebecca Thompson, gate agent for Flight 832. Rebecca, this is Captain Lisa Chen, chief pilot for the Eastern region. The passenger you're questioning is Captain David Johnson, one of our most senior pilots. He's traveling on official company business to take command of Flight 415 tomorrow morning in Miami. What exactly is the problem here?" Rebecca's face began to pale as she realized the gravity of the situation. "Well, ma'am, we had some concerns about the authenticity of his credentials, and our flight attendant felt that—" "Your flight attendant felt what?" Lisa's voice was now ice cold and could be heard clearly by everyone in the gate area. Patricia stepped forward, apparently not realizing how deep a hole she was digging for herself. "This is Patricia Williams, lead flight attendant. Ma'am, we have procedures for verifying passenger credentials, especially when someone claims to be an airline employee. This passenger was being uncooperative and—" "Uncooperative?" Lisa cut her off. "Patricia, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Captain Johnson is not just any pilot. He's the head of our pilot training program. He personally trained me when I was promoted to captain 5 years ago. He has an impeccable record and has been with this company longer than you've probably been working in aviation." The color drained from Patricia's face. Kevin, who had been quietly standing in the background, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Furthermore," Lisa continued, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who was clearly very high up in the company hierarchy, "I'm looking at the crew manifest right now, and I see that Captain Rodriguez is flying your route tonight. Tom Rodriguez? He was David's co-pilot for 3 years before he made captain. Do you want to explain to me how you failed to verify Captain Johnson's identity when you have someone on your flight crew who could have identified him instantly?" Patricia opened her mouth, but no words came out. Several passengers were now openly staring at her with expressions of disbelief and disgust. "I'm currently in my office at the airport," Lisa continued. "I'll be at gate 15 in exactly 3 minutes. And Patricia? We're going to have a very long conversation about what just happened here." The phone line went dead. The gate area fell completely silent except for the usual airport background noise of announcements and rolling luggage. David calmly put his phone back in his pocket and looked around at the shocked faces surrounding him. "Well," he said quietly, I guess we'll wait for Captain Chen to arrive. Rebecca. The gate agent was visibly shaking now. She realized that she had just potentially ended her career by supporting Patricia's discriminatory behavior. Captain Johnson, I sincerely apologize. If you had known what? David interrupted. If you had known I was telling the truth when I showed you my airline ID? If you had known that treating passengers with respect should be standard procedure regardless of what they look like? The businessman who had been defending David stepped forward. Captain Johnson, I want to personally apologize for what you've been put through tonight. This is absolutely unacceptable. Thank you, David replied. I appreciate your support throughout this situation. The law student lowered her phone. Captain, I've recorded everything that happened here tonight. If you need this evidence for any kind of formal complaint, I'll be happy to share it with you. I'd appreciate that, David said, then looked directly at Patricia. Because there will definitely be formal complaints filed. Patricia was now clearly panicking. Captain Johnson, please understand. We were just following protocol. We didn't mean any protocol? David's voice rose slightly for the first time during the entire ordeal. Show me the protocol that says questioning a passenger's credentials because of their race is standard procedure. Show me the protocol that says treating someone differently based on the color of their skin is acceptable. Kevin finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. There is no such protocol. That's right, David said. There's no protocol for what happened here tonight. This was discrimination, plain and simple. Just then, David saw a familiar figure striding quickly down the terminal corridor. Captain Lisa Chen was a small woman, but she commanded respect wherever she went. She was dressed in her pilot's uniform and looked absolutely furious. Which one of you is Patricia Williams? Lisa called out as she approached the gate. Patricia reluctantly raised her hand, looking like she was about to face a firing squad. Lisa walked directly up to her, ignoring everyone else for the moment. Patricia, in 25 years of working in aviation, I have never been more embarrassed by the behavior of an airline employee. You have just subjected one of our most respected captains to public humiliation, based on nothing more than your own prejudices. She turned to address the crowd of passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally apologize on behalf of Skyline Airlines for what you've witnessed here tonight. This behavior is absolutely not representative of our company values, and I assure you that appropriate action will be taken. Lisa then walked over to David and spoke quietly, but loud enough for others to hear. David, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Your seat in first class is waiting, and I'll personally ensure that your flight is held until you're comfortably settled on board. As David finally walked toward the aircraft door, he could hear Lisa behind him beginning what was clearly going to be a very difficult conversation with Patricia, Rebecca, and Kevin. The passengers who had witnessed the entire ordeal followed him onto the plane, many of them stopping to shake his hand or offer words of support. But David knew that while this particular battle was over, the war against this kind of treatment was far from finished. The next morning, David was sitting in the cockpit of Flight 415 in Miami, running through his pre-flight checklist, when his phone started buzzing with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, and social media alerts were pouring in faster than he could read them. His co-pilot, Captain James Wright, looked over with concern. Everything okay, David? Your phone's been going crazy for the past 10 minutes. David picked up his phone and opened the first notification. It was a link to a video posted on social media with the caption, Skyline Airlines flight attendant refuses to let black pilot board first class, shocking discrimination caught on camera. The video had already been viewed over 50,000 times and it was posted less than 12 hours ago. Oh no, David muttered under his breath. What's wrong? James asked. David showed him the phone screen. Remember that incident I told you about yesterday at the gate? Someone recorded it and now it's all over the internet. James watched a portion of the video, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. David, this is terrible. But you know what? I'm glad it was recorded. People need to see this kind of thing actually happens. Meanwhile, 200 miles away at Skyline Airlines headquarters in Atlanta, CEO Michael Thompson was having the worst morning of his career. His assistant had woken him up at 5:30 a.m. to tell him about a viral video involving one of their flight crews. By the time he arrived at the office, the video had been shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. Get me the head of HR, the legal department, and whoever's in charge of public relations," Michael told his assistant as he stormed into his office. "And I want all the security footage from Gate 15 yesterday evening. Everything." Within an hour, Michael's conference room was filled with executives, all looking at laptop screens showing different social media posts about the incident. The hashtag #SkylineShame was trending on Twitter, and news outlets were starting to pick up the story. "How bad is this?" Michael asked his PR director, Helen Carter. "It's bad, sir," Helen replied, scrolling through her tablet. "We've got over 200,000 views across different platforms, and the comments are, well, they're not good for the company." Michael's phone rang. It was the chairman of the board. "Michael, what the hell is going on down there?" The chairman's voice boomed through the speakerphone. "I've got board members calling me asking why our employees are discriminating against our own pilots." "Sir, we're handling the situation. We've launched a full investigation." "Investigation?" "Michael, there's video evidence. The whole world can see what happened. This isn't something you investigate. This is something you fix, immediately." After the call ended, Michael turned to his HR director, Carol Martinez. "Carol, I want everything we have on the employees involved in this incident. Employment records, performance reviews, any previous complaints, everything." "I'm already on it," Carol replied, typing rapidly on her laptop. "I've pulled the files for Patricia Williams, Kevin Thompson, and Rebecca Rodriguez." "What do the initial reports show?" Carol's face grew grim as she read from her screen. "Patricia Williams has been with the company for 8 years. She's had 3 formal complaints filed against her for inappropriate behavior toward passengers, and 2 informal complaints that were never fully investigated." "What kind of complaints?" Michael asked. 2 were about her being rude to passengers of color. 1 was about her making inappropriate comments about a passenger's accent. The other complaints were about her general attitude and unprofessional behavior. Michael felt his stomach drop. Why was she never disciplined for these complaints? It looks like her supervisors at the time, well, they didn't take the complaints seriously. The report suggests they were dismissed as personality conflicts or misunderstandings. Helen, the PR director, looked up from her phone. "Sir, we've got a problem. The local news stations in both Atlanta and Miami are running the story, and CNN just called asking for a statement." Michael rubbed his temples. This was becoming a nightmare. "What about the other employees involved?" "Kevin Thompson has a clean record," Carol continued. "This is his first year with the company, and he has no previous complaints. Rebecca Rodriguez, the gate agent, also has a clean record, but what? But according to the witness statements we're collecting, she immediately supported Patricia's position without doing any independent verification. Several passengers have contacted us directly saying they felt her behavior was inappropriate." Just then, Michael's assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Sir, Captain Chen is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Lisa Chen walked into the room carrying a thick folder. She was still clearly angry about what had happened to David, but she maintained her professional composure. "Mr. Thompson," she began without preamble, "I need you to understand the severity of what happened yesterday. Captain Johnson isn't just any employee. He's one of our most respected pilots, and more importantly, he's the head of our diversity and inclusion training program for new pilots." Michael's face went pale. "He heads our diversity training?" "That's right," Lisa continued. "The man who was publicly humiliated by your employees for being black is the same man who's been working to make this airline more inclusive." "Do you see the irony in that?" Helen whispered something to Michael, then spoke up. "Captain Chen, we're getting reports that passengers on the flight are posting their own videos and testimonials about what they witnessed. Several of them are praising Captain Johnson for how he handled the situation." "As they should," Lisa replied. "David showed incredible restraint and professionalism throughout that entire ordeal. A lesser person might have lost their temper, and frankly, they would have been justified in doing so." Carol had been quietly working on her laptop during this conversation. "Sir, I've been reviewing the security footage from the gate area. The cameras captured everything, and it's even worse than the passenger videos show." "How so?" Michael asked. "The full footage shows that Patricia's behavior was discriminatory from the very first moment Captain Johnson approached her. Her body language, her tone of voice, the way she immediately questioned his credentials, it's all there. And you can clearly see how differently she treated the other passengers, especially the white passengers." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "What about the airport security footage?" "That's even more damning," Carol replied. "It shows Captain Johnson remaining calm and respectful throughout the entire incident, While Patricia became increasingly hostile and unprofessional, Lisa leaned forward in her chair. "Mr. Thompson, I need to tell you something else. This morning, I've received calls from 6 other pilots, all of them minorities, who say they've had similar experiences with Patricia Williams over the years, but they never reported it because they didn't think anything would be done." 6 other pilots? Michael asked in disbelief. 6 that called me just this morning. There are probably more who haven't come forward yet. Helen looked up from her phone again. "Sir, the story is now being picked up by national news outlets. The Washington Post just published an article about discrimination in the airline industry, using this incident as a case study." Michael stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy airport below. Planes were taking off and landing, carrying passengers who trusted Skyline Airlines to treat them fairly and with respect. He realized that this incident wasn't just about one bad employee. It was about systemic failures in how the company handled discrimination complaints. "Carol," he said without turning around, "I want you to pull every complaint file we have against Patricia Williams. I want to know why these complaints weren't taken seriously, and I want to know who made the decisions to ignore them." "Yes, sir." "And Helen, draft a public statement. We're going to take full responsibility for what happened, and we're going to announce concrete steps we're taking to make sure it never happens again." Lisa stood up to leave. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you understand that the black pilots in this company are watching how you handle this situation. They're watching to see if Skyline Airlines really cares about equality and justice, or if this is just going to be swept under the rug like so many other incidents." As Lisa left the conference room, Michael continued staring out the window. He knew that the decisions he made in the next few hours would determine not just the fate of the employees involved, but the future reputation of Skyline Airlines itself. The investigation was revealing a pattern of discrimination that went far deeper than one incident at one gate. And Michael realized that nothing short of decisive action would be enough to restore the trust that had been broken. 2 days after the viral video had spread across the internet, CEO Michael Thompson stood behind a podium in Skyline Airlines' main conference center. Cameras from major news networks were positioned throughout the room, and reporters filled every available seat. The company's stock had dropped 12% since the story broke, and passengers were canceling flights in protest. Michael took a deep breath and looked directly into the cameras. This was the most important speech of his career, and he knew it. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady but serious. "I'm here today to address the discrimination incident that occurred at Gate 15 3 days ago, involving Captain David Johnson and members of our flight crew." The room was completely silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. "First, I want to say directly to Captain Johnson and to everyone watching, what happened that night was completely unacceptable. There is no excuse for the treatment Captain Johnson received from our employees. None whatsoever." Michael paused, letting his words sink in. "After a thorough investigation that included reviewing security footage, interviewing witnesses, and examining employment records, we have made the following decisions. Patricia Williams, the lead flight attendant involved in this incident, has been terminated from Skyline Airlines effective immediately." A murmur went through the crowd of reporters. Additionally, Kevin Thompson, the flight attendant who supported Ms. Williams' actions, has been terminated, and Rebecca Rodriguez, the gate agent who escalated the situation instead of resolving it, has also been terminated. Michael's expression grew even more serious. "But these terminations are just the beginning. Our investigation revealed that Ms. Williams had a pattern of discriminatory behavior that was reported by passengers and colleagues multiple times over her 8 years with the company. These complaints were not properly investigated or addressed by management." He turned a page in his prepared statement. "As a result, we are also taking action against the supervisors who failed to address these complaints. 3 managers have been demoted, and 2 others are being placed on administrative leave pending further review." The room buzzed with quiet conversations as reporters scribbled notes and whispered to their cameramen. "Furthermore," Michael continued, "we are implementing immediate and comprehensive changes to prevent incidents like this from ever happening again. Effective next week, every single Skyline Airlines employee will undergo mandatory sensitivity and anti-discrimination training. This training will be repeated annually." He looked directly into the main camera. "We are also creating a new position, Director of Diversity and Inclusion. This person will report directly to me and will have the authority to investigate any complaints of discrimination or bias. Captain Johnson has graciously agreed to help us develop this new program. Meanwhile, David was at his home in Tampa, watching the press conference on television. His wife, Dr. Angela Johnson, sat beside him on the couch holding his hand. Their 2 teenage children had gathered around to watch as well. "Dad, are you really going to help them create this new program?" asked his 17-year-old daughter Zoe. David nodded. "Sometimes the best way to fight discrimination is from the inside. If I can help make sure this never happens to another pilot or any passenger, then something good will have come from all this." His 15-year-old son, Tyler, looked up from his phone. "Dad, did you see that your video has been viewed over 2 million times now? And there are thousands of comments supporting you." David smiled sadly. "I never wanted to be famous for something like this. But if it helps bring about change, then maybe it was worth it." Back at the press conference, Michael was taking questions from reporters. "Mr. Thompson," called out a reporter from CNN, "what message does this send about airline safety and passenger rights?" "It sends the message that discrimination has no place in the airline industry," Michael replied firmly. "Our passengers trust us with their safety, and that includes feeling safe from harassment and bias. We failed, Captain Johnson, and we failed our passengers who witnessed this incident." A reporter from the Washington Post raised her hand. "What about compensation for Captain Johnson? Will he be taking legal action against the airline?" "Captain Johnson and his legal team are in discussions with our company. I can't comment on the specific details, but I can say that we are committed to making this right in every way possible." What Michael didn't mention publicly was that David had already been offered a significant promotion and a substantial financial settlement. The company had also agreed to donate $500,000 to a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in aviation. 3 weeks later, David was sitting in his new office at Skyline Airlines headquarters. The nameplate on his door read Captain David Johnson, Director of Diversity and Inclusion. It was a position that had been created specifically for him, with the full authority to investigate complaints and make binding recommendations for disciplinary action. His assistant knocked on the door. "Captain Johnson, you have a visitor." A young black woman in a pilot's uniform walked into his office. She looked nervous but determined. "Captain Johnson, my name is Captain Nicole Washington. I fly for Regional Express Airlines, and I wanted to thank you for what you did." "Thank you for coming by," David replied, standing to shake her hand. "Please sit down. What can I do for you?" "Well, sir, after your story went public, I finally found the courage to report a discrimination incident that happened to me last year. My airline is now taking it seriously, and they're implementing new policies similar to what Skyline is doing." David felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was exactly why he had taken this new position. "That's wonderful to hear, Captain Washington. Change is happening across the industry because people like you are speaking up." Nicole smiled. "There's something else, sir. I've started a support group for minority pilots who have experienced discrimination. We meet once a month, and we'd love to have you speak to our group sometime." "I would be honored," David replied. Over the following months, David's story continued to have ripple effects throughout the aviation industry. Airlines across the country began reviewing their own policies and procedures. Several other companies created similar diversity positions, and pilot training programs started including mandatory courses on bias and discrimination. Patricia Williams, the flight attendant who had started it all, found it difficult to find work in the airline industry. Her termination and the reasons for it had become public knowledge, and no major airline was willing to hire her. She eventually moved to a different state and found work in retail, far from the aviation world. Kevin and Rebecca also struggled to find new jobs in aviation. The incident had taught the industry that discrimination would have real consequences for everyone involved, not just the main perpetrator. A year after the incident, David received an award from the National Association of Black Pilots for his courage and leadership in fighting discrimination. During his acceptance speech, he said something that resonated with pilots and passengers alike. "Change doesn't happen when we stay quiet about injustice. It happens when we stand up, speak out, and work together to make things better. What happened to me at that gate was painful and humiliating, but if it helps create a more fair and just aviation industry for everyone, then it was worth it." The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Today, Skyline Airlines is considered one of the most inclusive airlines in the industry. Their diversity training program, developed with David's input, has been adopted by dozens of other companies. David still flies occasionally, but he spends most of his time in his role as Director of Diversity and Inclusion, investigating complaints, developing training programs, and mentoring young pilots from all backgrounds. The incident that could have ended his career instead transformed it. And more importantly, it helped transform an entire industry. Sometimes standing up for what's right in the face of injustice can create changes that reach far beyond what anyone could have imagined. And whenever David boards a plane now, whether as a pilot or a passenger, he's treated with the respect and dignity that every person deserves, regardless of the color of their skin.